The baby had driven away 40 nannies, but what happened the moment he saw the new maid would leave an entire mansion speechless. Noah Romano's cry echoed through the third floor of the estate, rolling down marble hallways and beneath crystal chandeliers that glittered in the late afternoon sun. The sound wasn't loud anymore. It was tired. Frustrated. The kind of cry that came after months of confusion. Ethan Romano stood outside the nursery with his hands in his pockets, staring through the open doorway. At 6 feet 3 inches tall, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, he looked like a man who controlled every room he entered. But not this one. Not today. Not ever. Inside the nursery, another nanny was packing her bag. She wasn't angry. She wasn't even upset. She simply looked exhausted. 2 weeks earlier she had arrived with glowing references, a degree in child development, and complete confidence. Now she walked toward the door with defeated eyes and trembling disappointment. Noah sat in the middle of the nursery floor surrounded by toys worth thousands of dollars. None of them interested him. The little boy folded his arms and turned his face away from everyone around him. Ethan watched the nanny leave without saying a word. What was there left to say? She was number 40. 40 trained caregivers. 40 professionals. 40 women who had promised they could help. None had lasted. Some stayed a month. Some stayed a week. A few didn't make it through the first day. The head housekeeper lowered her eyes. Nobody dared speak first. The silence hanging over the mansion felt heavier than the stone walls themselves. Noah's nursery overlooked Lake Michigan. Sunlight shimmered across the water outside the giant windows, but the room felt strangely cold. Ethan finally stepped inside. "Buddy," he said softly. Noah didn't look up. The little boy simply clutched a worn stuffed elephant against his chest. Ethan felt something tighten inside him. 3 years ago, this room had been filled with laughter. 3 years ago, Noah's mother had filled every corner of the mansion with warmth. Now the nursery felt like a place everyone entered carefully, as though one wrong movement could break something fragile. Ethan knelt beside his son. Noah shifted away. Not far. Just enough. It was a small movement. But it hurt anyway. The billionaire businessman. The feared mafia boss. The man newspapers called untouchable. None of those titles mattered when his own child seemed lost behind invisible walls. "Mr. Romano," the housekeeper finally whispered. Ethan looked up. The agency sent one more candidate. A long pause followed. Nobody sounded hopeful anymore. Hope had become expensive in this house. Ethan exhaled slowly and rose to his feet. "Fine," he said. "Send her in." Downstairs, near the grand entrance, Brianna Jackson stood alone holding a worn handbag with both hands. Her interview dress was simple. Her shoes were old but polished carefully. She shifted nervously beneath the massive chandelier above her. Around her, staff members exchanged uncertain glances. Some looked surprised. Others looked skeptical. Brianna had seen those looks her entire life. She knew exactly what they meant. Yet she kept her shoulders straight and her eyes calm. She had come for a job. Nothing more. Upstairs, Noah suddenly lifted his head. For the first time all afternoon, his attention shifted toward the nursery door. Ethan noticed immediately. The room grew quiet. Somewhere downstairs, footsteps echoed across the marble floor. And for reasons nobody could explain, the little boy smiled. Brianna Jackson had learned long ago that people usually made up their minds about her before she ever spoke a single word. As she stood beneath the towering chandelier of the Romano estate, she could feel those judgments floating through the air around her. Some came from curious glances. Others came from quiet whispers that stopped the moment she looked in their direction. The mansion felt larger than any place she had ever entered, with ceilings that seemed to stretch forever and polished marble floors that reflected the golden afternoon light. Everything around her spoke of wealth, power, and perfection. Brianna felt painfully aware that she belonged to none of those things. Her interview dress had been purchased from a discount store 3 years earlier. Her handbag showed signs of wear around the edges. Even so, she had spent nearly an hour preparing that morning, carefully pressing her clothes and fixing her hair. She believed that dignity mattered, even when life gave you very little. A tall woman in a navy uniform approached her. This was Evelyn Parker, the head housekeeper. Her expression remained professional, but Brianna noticed the hesitation in her eyes. It was the same hesitation Brianna had seen during countless job interviews. Evelyn glanced at the file in her hand before looking back up. "You worked at a daycare center?" she asked. "For 4 years," Brianna replied with a gentle smile. "And before that?" "I helped care for children at a community center." Evelyn nodded slowly. "Why leave?" Brianna paused. The answer was complicated. Budget cuts. Family responsibilities. Bills that never stopped arriving. A life that often felt like it was balancing on the edge of a cliff. "The center closed," she said simply. Evelyn accepted the answer and motioned for her to follow. As they walked through the mansion, Brianna noticed framed family photographs displayed between expensive paintings. Most showed Ethan Romano holding a younger Noah. In several pictures there was also a beautiful blonde woman whose smile seemed capable of warming entire rooms. Brianna assumed she was Noah's mother. Something about those photographs felt different from the rest of the mansion. Softer. More human. Upstairs, 2 staff members stood outside the nursery. One of them quietly shook his head after seeing Brianna. The other looked away altogether. Brianna pretended not to notice. She had spent years pretending not to notice. The hallway felt unusually quiet. Somewhere in the distance a grandfather clock ticked steadily. Sunlight streamed through enormous windows overlooking the lake. Then Brianna heard a small laugh. Just one. Brief and unexpected. Everyone froze. Evelyn stopped walking. The 2 staff members exchanged confused looks. "Did you hear that?" one whispered. The other nodded. A second later the sound came again. A child's laugh. Soft. Genuine. Almost impossible. Brianna did not understand why everyone suddenly looked alarmed. She certainly did not know that nobody in the mansion had heard Noah laugh in weeks. Upstairs inside the nursery, Ethan Romano stood motionless beside his son. Noah remained seated on the floor holding his stuffed elephant. His eyes were fixed on the doorway. His smile had grown wider. Ethan felt his heartbeat slow. Then quicken again. Something was happening. Something unusual. And as the approaching footsteps grew closer, every person in the Romano mansion found themselves waiting for the exact same thing. What would happen when Noah finally met Brianna Jackson face to face? The child had not smiled in months, and yet the moment the new maid stepped through the front door, something impossible happened. Noah Romano sat on the nursery floor of the vast lakeside mansion, his small fingers wrapped around a worn stuffed elephant while sunlight spilled across the polished hardwood beneath him. The room was filled with every comfort money could buy, shelves lined with educational toys, custom furniture crafted by the best designers in Chicago, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the blue waters of Lake Michigan. None of it mattered. At 2 years old, Noah had become the center of a problem nobody could solve. One by one, caregivers had arrived with glowing recommendations and years of experience. One by one, they had quietly left. Some stayed for weeks. Others lasted only days. Every departure left the mansion a little quieter and Ethan Romano a little more exhausted. Standing near the nursery doorway, Ethan watched another nanny collect her belongings and walk toward the elevator. He did not stop her. There was no point. The disappointment in her eyes mirrored the disappointment he had seen dozens of times before. Ethan was a man accustomed to finding solutions. His businesses stretched across multiple states. Powerful people answered his phone calls within seconds. Problems that seemed impossible for others usually disappeared with enough effort, enough resources, enough determination. But his son remained the one challenge he could not overcome. The nursery door closed softly behind the departing nanny. Silence settled over the third floor. Noah stared at the floor without speaking. Ethan loosened his tie and rubbed the back of his neck. He looked older than his 38 years in moments like these. The loss of Noah's mother had changed everything. The bright laughter that once filled the mansion had faded, replaced by long stretches of quiet concern. Even the staff moved more carefully now, as though sadness itself lived inside the walls. A knock interrupted the silence. Evelyn Parker, the head housekeeper, appeared in the doorway holding a folder. Her posture remained professional, but hesitation flickered across her face. "The agency sent one more candidate," she said carefully. Ethan almost laughed. One more candidate. He had heard those words too many times. Another expert. Another recommendation. Another promise. Yet something in Evelyn's expression made him pause. "Send her in," he replied. Downstairs, Brianna Jackson stood alone beneath a crystal chandelier that glittered like 1,000 tiny stars. She adjusted the strap of her worn handbag and took a slow breath. The mansion was larger than any building she had ever entered. Marble floors stretched in every direction. Paintings hung in ornate frames. Everything seemed polished to perfection. Several staff members glanced at her before quickly looking away. Brianna recognized those looks. She had seen them her entire life. People noticed her size before they noticed her smile. They judged her appearance before hearing her voice. Still, she kept her shoulders straight. She had not come seeking approval. She had come seeking opportunity. Upstairs, Noah suddenly lifted his head. His attention shifted toward the hallway. For the first time that afternoon, curiosity appeared in his eyes. Ethan noticed immediately. So did every staff member nearby. The distant sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the mansion. Then something happened that nobody expected. A small smile slowly appeared on Noah Romano's face. The smile disappeared almost as quickly as it had appeared, but the shock it left behind lingered in the nursery long after. Ethan Romano stood perfectly still, unable to remember the last time he had seen that expression on his son's face. Noah was not a child who smiled at strangers. In truth, Noah barely reacted to anyone anymore. As Brianna followed Evelyn down the hallway toward the third floor, she remained unaware of the quiet storm unfolding ahead of her. She noticed the expensive artwork lining the walls, the polished wood railings, and the enormous windows that flooded the mansion with golden afternoon light. Everything felt elegant, carefully maintained, almost frozen in time. Yet beneath that beauty, something felt heavy. Even before reaching the nursery, Brianna could sense it. The staff spoke softly. Their footsteps seemed cautious. It was as if everyone inside the mansion was protecting a wound nobody wanted to touch. When they reached the nursery door, Evelyn paused. Her hand rested briefly on the handle before she looked at Brianna. "Mr. Romano will explain the position," she said. Brianna nodded. "Thank you." Evelyn opened the door. Inside, the room was larger than Brianna expected. Shelves filled with books lined one wall. A reading corner sat beneath a wide window overlooking the lake. Soft afternoon sunlight stretched across the floor. And there, sitting beside a stuffed elephant, was Noah Romano. For a moment, Brianna simply looked at him. He was smaller than she imagined. A little boy with dark hair and thoughtful eyes. He looked less like a problem and more like a child carrying something far too heavy for his age. Ethan stepped forward. His expression remained guarded. "Miss Jackson." "Brianna is fine," she replied gently. Ethan nodded once. "This is Noah." Brianna smiled. "Hello, Noah." The little boy stared at her. No greeting came back. No reaction at all. The silence stretched. Brianna had experienced moments like this before. Children communicated differently. Some needed words. Others needed patience. She did not rush to fill the silence. Instead, she lowered herself carefully onto the floor several feet away. Ethan watched immediately. Most applicants tried too hard. They introduced toys, games, activities, endless attempts to impress. Brianna simply sat down. Noah continued staring at her. Seconds passed. Then a minute. The room remained quiet except for the faint hum of the air conditioning and the distant cry of seagulls outside. Brianna noticed the stuffed elephant. "I like him," she said softly. "He looks very important." Noah glanced down at the elephant before looking back at her. It was a small movement, but Ethan noticed. He noticed everything when it came to Noah. "When I was little," Brianna continued, "I had a stuffed rabbit. His ears were crooked because I carried him everywhere." Noah's eyes remained fixed on her face. She was not asking questions. Not demanding responses. She was simply talking as though his silence deserved the same respect as someone else's conversation. Ethan felt something unfamiliar stir inside him. Hope. Dangerous hope. The kind that hurt when it disappeared. Then Noah slowly rose to his feet. Neither adult moved. The little boy clutched the elephant against his chest and took one careful step forward. Then another. And another. Ethan's heartbeat quickened as his son continued walking directly toward Brianna Jackson. Brianna Jackson had learned long ago that first impressions were often decided before she ever opened her mouth. As she stood beneath the enormous crystal chandelier of the Romano estate, she could feel curious eyes following her from every direction. Some staff members glanced at her briefly before looking away. Others whispered quietly among themselves. Brianna pretended not to notice. She had spent most of her life pretending not to notice. Her dark blue dress was simple and carefully pressed. Her shoes had been polished the night before. Her handbag showed signs of age, but she carried it with quiet pride. Everything she owned had been earned through hard work. Nothing had ever been given to her. The mansion felt like another world. Marble floors stretched across hallways larger than entire apartments she had lived in. Paintings hung beneath golden lights. Fresh flowers filled expensive crystal vases. Every detail reflected wealth. Yet the atmosphere felt strangely heavy. The beauty was undeniable, but happiness seemed harder to find. Evelyn Parker led her through the first floor. "The position involves caring for Mr. Romano's son," she explained. "That is the primary responsibility." Brianna nodded. "I understand." Evelyn hesitated before continuing. "Many caregivers have worked here." Brianna noticed the careful wording. Not many caregivers worked here. Many caregivers had worked here. Past tense. "And they left?" Brianna asked gently. Evelyn released a quiet sigh. "Yes." They reached a long hallway lined with family photographs. Brianna slowed her pace. In nearly every frame she saw Ethan Romano holding a smiling little boy. Some photos included a beautiful blonde woman whose warm smile seemed to brighten every image. Family vacations. Birthday parties. Summer afternoons by the lake. The pictures felt alive in a way the mansion itself no longer did. Brianna looked at one photograph a moment longer than the others. Noah appeared younger. His smile reached all the way to his eyes. "His mother?" Brianna asked softly. Evelyn followed her gaze. For a brief moment sadness crossed the older woman's face. "Yes." Neither woman said anything else. They did not need to. The answer explained more than words could. Upstairs, two staff members stood outside the nursery. One glanced at Brianna and quickly looked away. The other offered a polite smile that failed to hide his doubt. Brianna recognized both reactions. She had been underestimated before. It no longer surprised her. As they approached the nursery, the hallway grew quiet. The only sound came from a grandfather clock somewhere deeper inside the mansion. Tick. 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 Then something unexpected happened. A small laugh floated through the doorway. Everyone froze. Evelyn stopped walking. One staff member blinked in disbelief. The other turned toward the nursery as if he had imagined it. The laugh came again. Soft. Brief. Real. Brianna looked from one face to another, confused by their reactions. She had no idea why such a simple sound had transformed the atmosphere. But inside the nursery, Ethan Romano was already staring at his son with widening eyes. Because for the first time in a very long time, Noah Romano sounded happy. Noah stopped only a few feet away from Brianna. The nursery seemed to hold its breath with him. Ethan remained motionless near the doorway, while Evelyn and the other staff members watched from the hall. Nobody wanted to interrupt whatever was unfolding in front of him. Brianna stayed exactly where she was on the floor. She did not reach toward Noah. She did not call his name again. She simply offered him the same calm smile she had worn from the moment she entered the room. The little boy studied her carefully. His dark eyes moved across her face as though searching for something only he could see. Seconds passed. Then more. Most adults would have become uncomfortable beneath such intense attention, but Brianna had spent years working with children. She understood that trust could not be rushed. Trust arrived when it was ready. Noah tightened his grip on the stuffed elephant. Brianna noticed one of the elephant's ears had been repaired several times. The stitching was uneven but careful. Someone had fixed it by hand. He must be very loved, she said softly. Noah glanced down at the toy. Then back at her. Ellie, he whispered. The word was so quiet that Ethan almost thought he imagined it. Brianna's smile widened. Ellie is a beautiful name. Noah looked at the elephant again. Mama gave her. The room fell silent. Ethan felt his chest tighten. Noah rarely mentioned his mother. Not anymore. In the months following her passing, he had withdrawn further and further into himself. Hearing those words now felt like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Brianna did not react with surprise. She simply nodded. Then Ellie must be very special. Noah took another step closer. Brianna noticed how carefully he moved, as though he was still deciding whether this new person belonged in his world. My rabbit was special too, she said. I used to tell him all my secrets. Noah blinked. Secrets? Lots of them. A tiny smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Ethan could hardly believe what he was seeing. This was not the same child who had ignored every caregiver, therapist, and specialist brought into the mansion. This was a little boy having a conversation. A simple one. But a conversation nonetheless. The sunlight shifted across the nursery floor, casting long golden reflections through the room. Outside, the lake shimmered beneath the afternoon sky. Inside, something even more remarkable was beginning to take shape. Noah slowly lowered himself beside Brianna. Not directly next to her. Close enough. The distance between them was small, but to Ethan it felt enormous. Brianna looked at the elephant again. Do you think Ellie likes stories? Noah nodded. Yes. Good, Brianna said softly. Because I know a lot of stories. Noah looked up immediately. Curiosity lit his face. For the first time in months, Ethan saw genuine interest replace the sadness that had settled behind his son's eyes. Then Noah did something nobody expected. He leaned slightly toward Brianna and rested Ellie carefully in her lap. The nursery fell completely silent. Because every person watching understood exactly what that gesture meant. Noah Romano had just shared the thing he trusted most. For nearly a year, the Romano mansion had become a revolving door of hopeful experts and quiet goodbyes. Long before Brianna Jackson walked through its front entrance, Ethan Romano had done everything a father could think of. He hired specialists from Chicago, New York, and Los Angeles. He converted entire rooms into play spaces. He filled shelves with books, puzzles, sensory toys, and educational programs recommended by professionals. Nothing seemed to reach Noah for long. The little boy spent most of his days in silence, holding Ellie close and watching the world from a distance. At first, everyone believed time would help. They said children were resilient. They said healing simply required patience. Ethan wanted to believe them. But as the months passed, he watched his son become quieter. Family friends stopped visiting as often. Birthday invitations went unanswered. Even simple moments felt difficult. The grand estate that once echoed with laughter now felt unusually still. Every morning, Ethan walked into Noah's nursery hoping for a breakthrough. Every evening, he left carrying the same unanswered questions. Why was his son pulling further away? Why did every caregiver struggle to connect with him? Why did happiness seem to disappear the moment it entered the room? Noah was never rude. Never angry. He simply seemed lost somewhere nobody else could follow. The child who once ran through hallways chasing bubbles now preferred sitting beside the window overlooking Lake Michigan. Some afternoons he would spend an hour watching sailboats move across the water without saying a single word. Ethan often sat nearby, pretending to read business reports while secretly observing his son. He noticed everything. The way Noah still reached for his mother's favorite blanket. The way he carried Ellie from room to room. The way he paused whenever he passed a family photograph. Small details that broke a father's heart more than anyone realized. Staff members tried their best. Evelyn organized activities. Tutors introduced games. Caregivers arrived with experience and confidence. Yet none of them could build the bridge Noah seemed unwilling to cross. Over time, even the employees began lowering their expectations. They stopped hoping for dramatic improvements. They focused on maintaining routines instead. Meals. Naps. Quiet afternoons. Life became predictable. Safe. Careful. Then Brianna arrived. Nobody expected anything different. She was simply another applicant filling another position. Another name added to a very long list. Yet standing in the nursery now, Ethan found himself witnessing something he had almost forgotten was possible. Curiosity. Noah was curious. The little boy who usually avoided strangers had walked across the room on his own. The little boy who rarely spoke had shared the story of Ellie. The little boy who protected his favorite toy above everything else had carefully placed it into Brianna's lap. Ethan felt a strange mixture of hope and fear. Hope because something extraordinary might finally be happening. Fear because disappointment had visited this house too many times before. Across the room, Brianna gently held the stuffed elephant as though it were the most valuable thing in the world. Noah watched her closely. Then, for the first time in many months, anticipation appeared in his eyes. It was the look of a child waiting to hear what happened next. The nursery remained completely silent as Brianna carefully held Ellie in her lap. She did not squeeze the worn stuffed elephant. She did not examine it. She treated it exactly the way Noah hoped she would, with gentle respect. The little boy watched her every movement. His attention never wandered. For Ethan, that alone felt extraordinary. Most people struggled to keep Noah engaged for more than a few moments. Yet here he sat, fully focused on a woman he had met only minutes earlier. Brianna looked down at Ellie and lowered her voice as though speaking to an old friend. "I think she has seen many adventures." Noah nodded immediately. "Lots." "Did she ever travel on a pirate ship?" Brianna asked. Noah thought about it seriously. "Maybe." "Maybe?" Brianna smiled. "That sounds like a story waiting to happen." A tiny laugh escaped Noah before he could stop it. The sound seemed to ripple through the room. Ethan felt his breath catch. He had almost forgotten what his son's laughter sounded like. Not because too much time had passed, but because grief had made every happy moment feel fragile. Noah slowly sat closer. The distance between them disappeared inch by inch. Brianna never rushed him. She simply continued speaking softly about Ellie's imaginary adventures. A pirate ship. A hidden island. A treasure chest filled with cookies instead of gold. Noah listened to every word. Soon he was adding details of his own. And dinosaurs. Of course, Brianna agreed. Every great treasure island needs dinosaurs. Noah smiled wider. The expression transformed his entire face. For the first time, Ethan could see the little boy from the old photographs. The child who once ran through the mansion laughing. The child who had not completely disappeared after all. Outside the nursery, Evelyn exchanged a glance with the staff members in the hallway. Nobody spoke. Nobody wanted to break the moment. It felt too important. Too delicate. Inside the room, Brianna carefully handed Ellie back to Noah. The little boy accepted the elephant but did not move away. Instead, he studied Brianna once more. The sunlight from the lake reflected softly across the floor between them. Somewhere downstairs, a grandfather clock marked another passing minute. Noah tilted his head. Brianna smiled back. Then something happened so quickly that nobody had time to react. Noah leaned forward. His tiny hand rested briefly against Brianna's cheek. The gesture was simple. Innocent. Unexpected. Brianna froze in surprise. Ethan took a step forward without realizing it. Then Noah gave her a small kiss on the cheek before settling back onto the floor with Ellie in his arms. The room went completely still. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even Noah seemed unaware of what he had just done. To him, it was the most natural thing in the world. But to everyone else, it felt impossible. Ethan stared at his son. His heart pounded against his ribs. 40 caregivers had entered this mansion hoping to reach Noah. Not one had received a gesture like that. Not one. Brianna touched her cheek lightly, her eyes shining with emotion. She did not look victorious. She did not look surprised by her own success. She simply looked grateful. Across the room, Noah smiled at her again. And for the first time in nearly a year, Ethan Romano allowed himself to believe that hope might finally be walking back into his home. The following morning, the Romano mansion woke to something it had not felt in a very long time. Anticipation. Sunlight streamed through the eastern windows as staff members moved quietly through their routines, but there was a subtle difference in the atmosphere. Conversations carried a hint of curiosity. Doors opened more often than usual. Even Evelyn Parker found herself glancing toward the nursery several times before breakfast. Everyone wanted to know whether the previous afternoon had been a beautiful accident or the beginning of something real. Brianna arrived just before 8 o'clock carrying the same worn handbag and warm smile. She greeted every employee she passed, regardless of whether they greeted her back. Some responded politely. Others merely nodded. Brianna did not seem bothered. She had spent years understanding that kindness was not a transaction. It was a choice. Upstairs, Noah sat beside the window holding Ellie against his chest. The lake shimmered beneath the morning sun, and small sailboats drifted across the water like white brushstrokes on blue glass. Ethan stood nearby with a cup of coffee in his hand. His phone vibrated constantly with business messages, but he ignored every notification. His attention remained fixed on his son. Then footsteps echoed from the hallway. Noah immediately turned toward the door. Ethan noticed the reaction at once. The little boy climbed to his feet before anyone announced a visitor. A few seconds later, Brianna appeared in the doorway. Noah smiled. It happened so naturally that nobody could have mistaken it. Not a polite smile. Not a hesitant one. A genuine smile. The kind that reached his eyes. Ethan felt something shift inside his chest. Brianna stepped into the room. "Good morning, Noah." "Morning," the little boy replied softly. Ethan nearly dropped his coffee. Yesterday had already felt extraordinary. Today felt impossible. Brianna walked over to the reading corner and sat down on the rug. She did not ask Noah to join her. She simply opened a picture book resting nearby and began turning pages. Within moments, Noah wandered over on his own and settled beside her. Not across the room. Not at a distance. Beside her. The simplicity of the moment carried more weight than anyone realized. For months, every interaction had required effort. Encouragement. Negotiation. Yet here Noah was, choosing connection without being asked. As Brianna read aloud, her voice remained soft and steady. She gave each character a different tone. Sometimes Noah giggled. Sometimes he corrected details in the story. Once he pointed at a drawing and began describing what he thought happened after the final page. Brianna listened to every word as though his ideas mattered. Because to her, they did. Ethan watched from the doorway. He could not remember the last time he had seen his son so engaged. So present. So alive. The mansion had spent nearly a year searching for someone capable of reaching Noah. Yet the person accomplishing it was not using special techniques or expensive programs. She was doing something far simpler. She was seeing the child before the problem. And as Ethan continued watching them together beneath the warm morning light, he began to wonder who Brianna Jackson truly was, and what pain had taught her to understand a lonely heart so well. Over the next several days, a new rhythm settled over the Romano mansion. It was subtle at first, almost easy to miss. Noah began waking up earlier. He spent less time sitting alone by the window. His meals became easier. His smiles appeared more often. None of the changes happened overnight, yet together they transformed the atmosphere of the entire estate. Staff members who once moved through the halls with quiet concern now exchanged hopeful glances. Even the sunlight seemed warmer as it poured through the enormous windows overlooking the lake. Brianna never treated these changes like victories. She never celebrated them or pointed them out. Instead, she focused on the small moments. Building block towers on the nursery floor. Reading stories in funny voices. Listening whenever Noah wanted to talk about Ellie and her imaginary adventures. Somehow she understood that healing rarely arrived in dramatic waves. It arrived one small moment at a time. One afternoon, Ethan returned home earlier than expected after a business meeting downtown. As he stepped into the mansion, he heard something that stopped him in his tracks. Laughter. Not from a television. Not from visitors. Noah's laughter. Real and bright. Ethan followed the sound upstairs. When he reached the nursery doorway, he paused. Brianna sat cross-legged on the floor wearing a paper crown Noah had made from construction paper. Noah wore one too. Between them stood a crooked cardboard castle covered in colorful drawings. "The dragon cannot come inside," Noah announced seriously. "Why not?" Brianna asked. "Because he eats too many cookies." Brianna gasped dramatically. "That is a very serious problem." Noah burst into laughter again. Ethan remained in the hallway, unnoticed. He watched his son's face glow with excitement. The sight struck him harder than he expected. For months he had been fighting to protect Noah from sadness. Yet somehow Brianna had accomplished something entirely different. She had given Noah permission to feel joy again. Later that evening, after Noah had fallen asleep clutching Ellie beneath his blanket, Ethan found Brianna in the kitchen making tea. The room smelled faintly of cinnamon and vanilla. Warm light reflected from the polished countertops. For a moment neither spoke. "You make it look easy," Ethan finally said. Brianna smiled softly. "It is not easy." "Then what is it?" Ethan asked. She stirred her tea slowly before answering. "Children know when people are trying to change them. They also know when people are simply trying to understand them." Ethan considered those words carefully. They stayed with him long after the conversation ended. Because for the first time, he realized Brianna was not helping Noah by fixing what was wrong. She was helping him by reminding him that nothing was wrong with him in the first place. And as Ethan stood alone later that night looking out across the dark waters of Lake Michigan, he found himself wondering what experiences had taught Brianna Jackson lessons that so many experts had missed. The answer arrived on a rainy Thursday afternoon when Ethan Romano was searching for a document in the Human Resources office. Outside, gray clouds drifted over Lake Michigan, and soft rain tapped against the tall windows of the mansion. Ethan had not intended to look through Brianna's employment file. In fact, he almost closed the folder after finding the paperwork he needed. Then a single page caught his attention. It was not a resume. It was a personal reference letter written several years earlier by the director of a community childcare center. Ethan read the first paragraph casually. He finished the last paragraph in silence. The letter described Brianna as patient, dependable, and deeply compassionate. But one sentence refused to leave his mind. It mentioned that despite experiencing a devastating personal loss, Brianna had continued volunteering with children in need. Ethan frowned. A few minutes later he found himself asking Evelyn if she knew anything more. The older woman hesitated before answering. Very little, Evelyn admitted. She does not talk about it. That evening, Ethan noticed Brianna sitting alone on a covered terrace overlooking the water after Noah had gone to sleep. A warm cup of tea rested between her hands. The lake reflected the fading colors of sunset, turning shades of gold and copper beneath the evening sky. Ethan almost walked away. Then he stopped. "May I join you?" he asked. Brianna smiled politely. "Of course." For a few moments neither spoke. The gentle sound of rain filled the silence. Finally Ethan looked toward the lake. The reference letter mentioned a personal loss. Brianna remained quiet. Ethan immediately regretted asking. Then she surprised him. "My son," she said softly. The words carried no bitterness. Only sadness. His name was Caleb. Ethan turned toward her. Brianna continued looking at the water. He was 6 years old. Her voice remained steady, but Ethan could hear the weight behind every word. He loved dinosaurs. He thought pancakes should be eaten for every meal. He could turn an ordinary Tuesday into an adventure. A small smile appeared before fading again. He became very sick. Ethan listened without interrupting. Brianna wrapped both hands around her teacup. "After he passed away, everyone told me I would eventually move on." She looked down at the steam rising from the cup. "But love does not work that way." The terrace fell quiet again. Rain continued falling beyond the roofline. Ethan suddenly understood something that had puzzled him for weeks. Brianna did not connect with Noah because she possessed some special technique. She connected with him because she understood loss. She recognized loneliness when she saw it. She knew what it felt like to miss someone every day. Across the mansion, Noah slept peacefully with Ellie tucked beneath his arm. And for the first time, Ethan began to realize that two wounded hearts had somehow found each other, not because they shared the same story, but because they understood the same kind of pain. The days that followed felt different inside the Romano mansion. Not dramatically different at first. The changes arrived quietly, almost like sunlight slowly pushing through heavy clouds. Noah began looking toward the nursery door every morning before breakfast. He started carrying Ellie through the hallways again instead of sitting alone beside the window for hours. Sometimes he even hummed softly to himself while arranging his toys across the floor. They were small changes, the kind most people might overlook. Ethan noticed every single one. One Tuesday morning, he stood outside the nursery holding a cup of coffee as Brianna and Noah sat together on a large rug beneath the window. The lake shimmered in the distance, reflecting the bright blue sky. Brianna was helping Noah build a castle from wooden blocks. She never corrected him when the walls leaned crooked. She never rushed him when he stopped to think. She simply followed his pace. "The king needs a garden," Noah announced. "Every king needs a garden," Brianna agreed. "What grows there?" Noah thought for a moment. "Cookies." Brianna nodded seriously. "The finest gardens always grow cookies." Noah laughed. The sound echoed through the room like music. Ethan lowered his eyes for a second. It was such an ordinary moment. yet it felt priceless. Later that afternoon, during lunch, something else happened. For months, mealtimes had been difficult. Noah usually pushed food around his plate or lost interest after a few bites. But while Brianna sat nearby telling a story about a dog who accidentally became mayor of a small town, Noah finished nearly his entire meal without anyone asking him to. Evelyn Parker watched from the doorway and exchanged a surprised glance with one of the kitchen staff. Nobody said a word. They simply smiled. By the end of the week, the changes became impossible to ignore. Noah slept better. He spent less time withdrawn. He spoke more often. Most importantly, he seemed lighter. As though some invisible weight resting on his tiny shoulders had finally started to lift. One evening, Ethan returned home after a long day downtown. The mansion was unusually quiet. He followed the sound of soft voices toward the library. There he found Brianna reading aloud while Noah rested beside her with his head against her arm. The little boy was completely absorbed in the story. Every few pages he asked a question. Every time, Brianna listened as though it was the most important question in the world. Ethan remained hidden near the doorway for several minutes. He did not want to interrupt. Watching them together stirred something complicated inside him. Gratitude. Relief. Curiosity. Because despite everything he had witnessed, he still did not fully understand why Brianna could reach Noah when nobody else could. Then Noah looked up from the book and smiled at her with complete trust. Brianna smiled back. In that quiet moment, Ethan began to suspect the answer had nothing to do with training or experience. It had something to do with the way she saw his son. And for the first time, he found himself wanting to know the story behind Brianna Jackson's kindness. 2 weeks after the conversation on the terrace, the Romano mansion felt more alive than it had in years. Fresh flowers appeared in the dining room more often. Staff members lingered in conversations instead of rushing through silent hallways. Most importantly, Noah continued to flourish. His laughter had become familiar again. His curiosity returned a little more each day. Yet on a bright Friday afternoon, something unexpected arrived in the form of a single phone call. Brianna stood alone near the staff entrance holding her cell phone against her ear. The conversation lasted less than 5 minutes. When it ended, she remained still for several moments, staring through a nearby window at the lake beyond the mansion grounds. Her expression was calm, but there was a sadness behind her eyes that had not been there before. Later that afternoon, while Noah colored pictures at a small table in the nursery, Brianna received an envelope delivered by courier. She placed it inside her bag without opening it. She thought nobody noticed. Ethan did. Over the next several days, small changes began to appear. Brianna smiled less often when she believed nobody was watching. She spent longer moments staring out windows. Sometimes she seemed lost in thought. Ethan recognized the look immediately. It was the expression of someone carrying a difficult decision. On Monday evening, after Noah had fallen asleep, Ethan found Brianna sitting alone in the garden overlooking the water. String lights glowed softly above the stone pathway. The air smelled of roses and freshly cut grass. For a while neither spoke. Then Ethan sat beside her. "You have been quiet lately," he said. Brianna looked down at her hands. "I received a job offer." Ethan felt something tighten inside his chest. "Another childcare position?" She nodded. "A private academy in Boston. Better pay. Better benefits. A long-term contract." The words hung between them. Ethan understood immediately why the decision mattered. Brianna had spent years struggling financially. Opportunities like this did not appear often. "That sounds like a wonderful offer," he said carefully. "It is." Yet she did not sound excited. The lake reflected the colors of sunset while a gentle breeze moved through the trees. Brianna stared at the water. "For the first time in a long time, I could stop worrying about bills. I could finally have stability." Ethan remained silent. He respected her too much to influence her choice. "Then why do you seem unhappy?" he finally asked. Brianna smiled sadly. Because leaving would be easier if I did not care. The answer lingered in the evening air. Inside the mansion, Noah slept peacefully upstairs, unaware that the person who had brought light back into his world might soon be gone. Ethan looked toward the dark silhouette of the house and realized something that unsettled him more than he expected. The thought of losing Brianna frightened him almost as much as it frightened the little boy sleeping inside. As the weeks passed, Ethan found himself paying attention to details he would have overlooked before. It started with small observations. Brianna always arrived a few minutes early. She always greeted every employee by name. She always remembered the little things people mentioned in conversation. One morning, Ethan watched from his office window as Brianna handed a homemade muffin to one of the groundskeepers who had casually mentioned skipping breakfast the day before. Another afternoon, she spent her lunch break helping a young housekeeper study for a certification exam. She never announced these things. She never seemed interested in recognition. She simply noticed when people needed kindness. The more Ethan observed, the more confused he became. Most people behaved differently when they thought nobody was watching. Brianna remained exactly the same. One rainy evening, after Noah had fallen asleep, Ethan walked through the kitchen and noticed several grocery bags sitting near the back entrance. The items were simple. Bread, soup, fresh fruit, a few basic household supplies. Curious, he asked Evelyn if the delivery belonged to the mansion. No, Evelyn replied. Brianna buys those every week. Ethan frowned. For herself? Evelyn shook her head. For a family a few blocks away. Their little girl has been sick for months. Ethan said nothing. Later that night, he reviewed security footage from the front gate. There she was. Every Saturday morning. Carrying bags to a small house near the lake. Never asking for attention. Never expecting anything in return. The discovery stayed with him. For years, Ethan had surrounded himself with people who wanted something. Contracts. Favors. Influence. Opportunities. Yet Brianna seemed motivated by something entirely different. The following Sunday, Noah was drawing pictures at the dining room table while Brianna sat beside him. Ethan happened to walk past just as Noah held up a crayon sketch. This is Brianna, he announced proudly. The drawing showed a smiling figure beneath a bright yellow sun. Beside her stood a much smaller figure holding an elephant. And who is that? Ethan asked. Noah looked at the picture as though the answer should be obvious. Me. Ethan smiled. I figured that part out. Noah thought for a moment. Then he added something that caused the entire room to become quiet. She makes people feel safe. Brianna lowered her eyes immediately. Noah returned to coloring as though he had said nothing unusual. But Ethan remained standing there, unable to move for several seconds. Safe. Out of everything a child could have chosen, that was the word Noah used. Not fun. Not nice. Safe. Ethan looked at Brianna differently after that. Not as an employee. Not as a caregiver. But as someone whose presence had quietly changed the emotional center of his home. And for the first time, he began wondering what would happen if one day she was no longer there. The decision could not be delayed forever. By the end of the week, Brianna would need to give Boston her answer. The letter remained folded neatly inside her handbag, but its presence seemed to follow her everywhere. On Wednesday afternoon, sunlight spilled across the nursery floor while Noah sat building another crooked castle from wooden blocks. Brianna helped him place the final tower on top. It is perfect, she said. Noah grinned proudly. It leans. The best castles always lean a little. Noah laughed. The sound filled the room. For a moment, Brianna wished time could simply stop. Later that evening, Ethan asked her to join him and Noah for dinner. The dining room felt warmer than it once had. Candles flickered softly across the long table. Through the windows, Lake Michigan reflected the colors of sunset. Noah spent most of the meal talking about Ellie, dinosaurs, and cookie gardens. Brianna listened to every story. Ethan listened too. Not because the stories were extraordinary, but because hearing Noah share them felt extraordinary enough. After dinner, Noah disappeared briefly upstairs and returned carrying a folded piece of paper. "For you," he said, holding it out to Brianna. She unfolded it carefully. It was another drawing. This one showed 3 figures standing beside the lake. One was very tall. One was small and holding an elephant. The third wore a bright yellow dress beneath a smiling sun. Above them, written in uneven letters, were 3 words Noah had worked hard to spell. "My family today." The room fell silent. Brianna felt tears gathering in her eyes. Ethan lowered his gaze for a moment. Noah simply smiled, unaware of the weight his gift carried. "I love it," Brianna whispered. "I really love it." The next morning, she made her decision. Boston would not be her future. When Ethan learned what she had chosen, he asked her to meet him in his office. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the lake. Sunlight filled the room. Brianna sat across from him, unsure what he wanted to discuss. Ethan placed a folder on the desk. "You turned down a wonderful opportunity," he said. Brianna smiled softly. "Some opportunities cannot be measured by a paycheck." Ethan nodded. Then he slid the folder toward her. Inside was a new employment contract. The salary exceeded the Boston offer. The benefits were better. There was also something else. A scholarship fund created in Caleb's name to support children at community childcare centers. Brianna stared at the pages in disbelief. "Why?" she asked quietly. Ethan looked toward the window before answering. "Because you changed my son's life." He paused. "And because this house became a home again when you walked through the front door." That evening, Noah raced across the nursery carrying Ellie and wrapped his arms around Brianna. She hugged him back as sunlight glowed through the windows behind them. Ethan watched from the doorway. Nobody spoke. Nobody needed to. Some people enter a life for a season. Others arrive exactly when they are needed most. And on that quiet evening beside the lake, the child everyone believed was unreachable reminded an entire mansion that the strongest connections are often built not through perfection, but through kindness, patience, and a heart willing to stay. The job offer arrived on a bright Monday morning tucked inside a large white envelope. Brianna almost ignored it. Most letters that arrived at her small apartment contained bills, advertisements, or reminders about responsibilities that never seemed to end. But this envelope carried the logo of a prestigious private academy in Boston. By the time she finished reading, her hands were trembling. The salary was higher than anything she had ever earned. The benefits were generous. Housing assistance was included. For someone who had spent years worrying about rent payments and unexpected expenses, it looked like the opportunity of a lifetime. Yet instead of excitement, she felt something heavier settle in her chest. That afternoon, she arrived at the Romano mansion carrying the letter inside her handbag. The lake sparkled beneath a clear blue sky, and sunlight poured through the enormous windows. Everything looked exactly the same. Yet nothing felt the same anymore. Throughout the morning, she tried focusing on Noah. They read books, built block towers, invented new adventures for Ellie. Noah laughed often, and every laugh made the decision feel more complicated. During lunch, Noah carefully drew pictures while Brianna sat beside him. Without looking up, he asked a simple question. "Will you be here tomorrow?" Brianna felt her heart tighten. "Of course." Noah nodded and returned to coloring. He had no idea why the question mattered. But Brianna did. Over the next few days, she carried the letter everywhere. Sometimes she convinced herself that accepting the offer was the responsible choice. Other times she imagined walking away from Noah and felt a sadness she could not explain. The academy represented security, stability, a future she had worked years to find. Yet every time she pictured leaving, she saw a little boy carrying a worn stuffed elephant through the hallways of a lakeside mansion. One evening, after Noah had fallen asleep, Brianna sat alone near the garden overlooking the water. The sunset painted the lake in shades of gold and orange. Gentle waves rolled against the shoreline below. Ethan happened to notice her sitting there. From a distance, she looked peaceful. But as he approached, he saw the worry hidden behind her eyes. "Something is bothering you," he said quietly. Brianna looked down at her hands before removing the folded letter from her bag. Ethan read it carefully. When he finished, he understood immediately. It was the kind of opportunity people rarely declined. "Congratulations," he said sincerely. Brianna smiled, but the smile did not reach her eyes. "Thank you." Silence settled between them. The evening breeze moved softly through the trees. Finally Ethan asked the question she had been avoiding. "Do you want to go?" Brianna stared across the water. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she answered honestly. "I thought I did." And as the last light of day faded across Lake Michigan, both of them realized that the hardest decisions are often not between a good choice and a bad one, but between the future you planned and the people who unexpectedly become part of your heart. The deadline arrived on Friday morning. The letter from Boston sat on Brianna's kitchen table beside a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. Outside her apartment window, the city moved through another ordinary day, but nothing felt ordinary to her. She had spent the entire week weighing possibilities, calculating expenses, imagining futures. One path offered security. The other offered something she could not easily explain. By the time she arrived at the Romano mansion that morning, she had made her choice. The lake shimmered beneath a bright blue sky as she walked through the front entrance. Noah spotted her almost immediately and ran across the nursery carrying Ellie in his arms. His smile appeared before he even reached her. Brianna knelt and hugged him gently. For a moment she simply closed her eyes and listened to his laughter. Later that afternoon, Ethan asked her to join him in his office. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. Brianna sat quietly while Ethan placed a folder on the desk between them. "Have you decided?" he asked. Brianna nodded. "Yes." Ethan waited. "I turned the offer down." For a second, neither spoke. The room felt unusually still. Then Ethan leaned back in his chair and released a slow breath. It was the first time all week that Brianna had seen genuine relief cross his face. "May I ask why?" he said. Brianna looked toward the water beyond the glass. "Because some opportunities change your circumstances," she replied softly. "And some opportunities change your life." Ethan understood exactly what she meant. He opened the folder and slid it across the desk. Inside was a new contract. The salary exceeded the Boston offer. The benefits were comprehensive. Flexible hours had been added. But that was not what captured Brianna's attention. Attached to the final page was a document establishing a charitable fund in Caleb's name. The scholarship would help support childcare programs for families who could not afford them. Brianna stared at the page. Her vision blurred. "Ethan," she whispered. "Why would you do this?" Ethan looked out at the lake before answering. "Because Noah needed someone who saw him before judging him." He paused. "And because Caleb deserves to be remembered." Tears filled Brianna's eyes. Downstairs, the grandfather clock chimed softly through the mansion. For the first time in years, the ache she carried for her son felt lighter. That evening, the three of them sat together in the nursery while the sunset painted the room in shades of gold and amber. Noah proudly showed them another drawing. This time there were 3 figures standing beside a lake. One held an elephant. One held a book. The tallest stood between them smiling. Above the picture were carefully written words in uneven letters. "My family." Brianna looked at the drawing. Ethan looked at it too. Neither corrected him. Neither needed to. As the last sunlight faded beyond the water, the mansion that had once felt empty and silent seemed alive again. And in that quiet moment, everyone finally understood something children often see long before adults do. The strongest bonds are not built by status, appearance, or wealth. They are built by kindness, patience, and the courage to stay when someone needs you most.